Hello, welcome to Build Succeeded. My name is Lucian and today I'm building Space Invaders. Space Invaders is an arcade game released in 1978 in Japan by a company called Taito, and it was an immediate commercial success. Versions of the game were ported in the following years on multiple consoles including Atari. I'm going to implement a version of this game today, and at the end of the video I'll have a challenge for you, so keep watching. Let's see what goes well with Space Invaders. I'll try a tile logger. I'm starting with my base engine for building 2D games. If you want to check it out and use it as a starting point for your games, there is a link in the description to the GitHub repository. I will create a video soon showing you how to use it to build your own games. I'm going to start with the ship. The ship will stay at the bottom of the screen and will be able to move left and right, so the white part of its position will be fixed. We should be able to change the ship's X position by pressing left and right on the keyboard. For this, I've added a class called Ship. I initialize the position in the center of the screen on the X-axis and bottom of the screen on the Y-axis. I've created methods to move left and right while clamping it to make sure it doesn't go outside the screen. The draw method simply draws the ship as a triangle. In the engine class, I'm initializing the ship and I set some key presses flags to false. I'm also initializing the direct2D resources for the ship. In the key up and key down methods, I set or reset the flags for the engine to know when the keys are pressed. In the logic method, I simply call the move methods on the ship if the keys are pressed. Finally, in the draw method, I call the draw method of the ship. If I run the app now, we should be able to see the ship and I should be able to move it around by pressing the keys, and it should not go outside the screen area. Now let's implement the projectile. The ship should be able to fire a projectile upwards when the user presses the fire key. I'll use the space key for this one. The ship should not be able to fire more than one projectile at a time, so we can keep a single projectile variable. The projectile will have a position, initially being the same position the ship was, and a speed. The ship projectile speed and direction will always be the same, but I'll keep this open for when the enemy will be able to fire projectiles back. I've added a class called Projectile. The constructor receives the initial position as well as a variable to know if the projectile is going up or down, depending on who is firing. The advanced method will make the projectile move by applying the speed to the position. Then another method to determine if the projectile is outside the screen area so we can remove it from the game. Finally, the draw method that will draw the projectile as a simple small circle. In the engine class, I've added the ship projectile variable, initially null, and a flag to know when the fire key is pressed. Now, if we scroll down to the key up and key down methods, we can see I've added the flag to the methods. In the logic method, if the key is pressed and we don't already have a projectile on the screen, we initialize the projectile object using the ship's current position. Then I've added the projectile logic as well, where I advance it, and if it goes outside the screen, I just remove it. Finally, in the draw method, I've added the draw method of the projectile. Running the code now, we should be able to fire a projectile when pressing the space key. And even if we move the ship, the projectile starts at the ship's position. For the enemies, I decided to go with a matrix, 10 columns and 5 rows. They will move right and left until they hit the side of the screen, then move down a bit and reverse direction. To implement that, I've added the Invader class. These are a couple of static properties to control the entire fleet of enemies. After all, they all move the same way together. In the constructor, we initialize the position from what we receive. For this one, I've decided to use images instead of drawing. They will look better. So this method loads the images from files. Since pp bitmap1 is static, the images will only load once in the memory and then used for each invader. I use two images to display a simple animation. Move left and move right will change the X position of the enemy. Then move down will change the Y position. Finally, draw will display either one or the other image to simulate an animation. In the engine class, I've added code to initialize the list of enemies, then some code to delete them at the end. Then I've added them to the initialize_2D method to load the images. In the logic method, I've added the invader's logic. As you can see, after an interval of time passed, I'm changing the image displayed, and in this code I'm checking if the invaders went far enough right to drop down and change the direction. Same thing here for going left. In the draw method, I'm calling the draw methods for all the invaders. If we run the code, you can see the invaders moving left and right, and they return if they reach the end. I can also fire, but we didn't implement any interaction between projectiles and enemies, so let's do that next. We know the position of the center of the enemy, so detecting a collision between the enemy and the projectile is as simple as checking if the position of the projectile is within the bounds of the enemy, which in my case is 22.5 pixels to the left and right and 20 pixels up and down. I've added a life stage variable to the invader class so I know if an invader is alive, exploding or dead. Exploding stage is when we show the explosion. I've also added a kill method that sets the enemy in explosion mode and reset the explosion timer. Then, advance will increase the explosion time until half a second passes, after which it will set the stage to dead. I also had to modify the draw method to handle different life stages. In the engine class, I'm now calling advance method on the list of invaders. And then this piece of code where I check for projectiles colliding with invaders and kill the invaders accordingly. Here is the isHit method that checks for the collision. If we try to shoot the enemies now, it looks like we can destroy them, but it's easy if they don't fire back. So let's give them some firepower. The enemies will fire randomly after a period of time passes. I've added this invader projectile to the engine class. Then, down here, I'm adding this block of invader projectile logic. After some time passes, I'm choosing a random alive enemy that will fire. Then I create a projectile at the position of the selected enemy. Below, I call advance on the projectile so it can drop down towards the player's ship. Finally, I'll add it to the draw method. So let's see if the enemies will fire. Yes, it does. But even if it hits the ship, it won't do anything, since we didn't implement any collisions for that. I've added another constructor to the ship class, one that receives a life number. That means this instance of the class will only be used to display in the corner of the screen to show the player how many lives it has left. I've also added the same life stage functionality to the ship, similarly to the enemy. That means our ship can now explode. I've implemented the advance method, the kill method, isHit, then finally added the different conditions in the draw method. In the engine class, I'm initializing the 3 lives ships. Also, I'm adding them to the initialization method. Finally, at the end of the logic method, I'm implementing the ship projectile collision, where if the ship gets hit, we explode it and decrease the number of lives. As you can see, now if the ship gets hit, it's destroyed. I've also made it a bit larger since it was too hard for the enemy to hit me. Okay, after some more tweaking and adding functionality for winning and losing, I finally have my version of the famous Space Invaders game. As promised, I have a challenge for you. If you noticed, in the original game, there are 4 blocks between the player and the enemy. They are shielding you and can be destroyed if you fire at them. How would you implement that? Pull the code from the GitHub link in the description of the video and give it a try. Or write a comment about your approach. I'll present the best solution you propose in a future video. Thank you so much for watching. If you like my video, give me a thumbs up, and if you want to see me implement more games, check my channel. See you soon!